Not everyone dies in the light. Some leave the world in noise, surrounded by voices. And some pass in a silence so deep that the world almost fails to notice. Ignatius was one of them. He did not begin life as a hero. There was no prophecy, no warning signs, only an ordinary man, born into a time where every choice carried a cost. There is something rarely understood about those later called martyrs. They do not live in order to die. They live for a very long time before choosing not to step back. In his early years, Ignatius never thought about sacrifice. He thought of days repeating themselves, familiar roads, faces that would grow old alongside his own. But the world does not allow everyone to remain untouched. When fear began to spread, when silence became the safest way to survive, Ignatius slowly realized that there are moments when not speaking becomes the most dangerous choice of all. This story is not about death. It is about the long time before a person decides to give everything. And if you are listening now, late into the night, let this story move slowly. Because Ignatius's path did not begin with fire. It began with a very long silence. Ignatius grew up in a city accustomed to footsteps rather than pauses. People moved quickly. They spoke softly. They learned not to look too long at anything that might cause trouble. From an early age, Ignatius noticed this. No one taught him with words. He learned by watching. He saw adults change their tone when certain subjects arose, saw doors closing earlier at night, saw worry in their eyes, even when the mouths smiled. Ignatius was not a remarkable child. He did not seek to lead, nor did he try to stand at the center. He preferred stillness, listening, remembering. Some afternoons, he sat quietly by the doorway, watching sunlight slide slowly across the ground. He wondered how a day could pass so gently while the human heart remained so heavy. As he grew older, small responsibilities were given to him. Tasks no one noticed, work that required patience more than talent. And there, Ignatius learned something important. Strength does not always live in the loudest places. His voice was never raised, yet when he spoke, others paused to listen, not from fear, but from feeling respected. Conversations stretched on, not because of many words, but because Ignatius left spaces between them, deep enough to matter. Meanwhile, the world outside slowly changed. New rules appeared, new boundaries were drawn, and fear became the fastest way to bind people together. Ignatius witnessed these changes quietly. He did not protest, but he did not turn away. Some nights he stayed awake late, not to plan, only to sit in silence, as if waiting for something not yet named. He did not know who he would become, nor which path lay ahead, but one thing grew clear within him. If silence existed only to protect oneself, then one day that silence would demand its price. And it was then, very gently, that his life began to turn toward another direction. Ignatius was no longer the boy sitting by the window. He began to realize that silence was sometimes not enough to survive. There were people who needed his words, yet he feared that if he spoke, the past would awaken. He tried speaking softly. The first words were cautious, as if afraid of shattering something fragile. But as he spoke,
Ignatius discovered a power in telling his story, not to persuade, but simply to exist. The first steps were the hardest. He walked familiar streets, places that had witnessed countless events. The eyes of the past still watched him, but he did not retreat. One evening, as the sun set, Ignatius stood before a small group of familiar faces. They had known him with eyes full of fear and respect.
Now they studied him with quiet scrutiny. He did not speak boldly. He did not raise his voice. He simply told. He spoke of days filled with silence, of choices whose every step demanded a price, of a light he had glimpsed in the dark. The listeners were silent. Some turned away. But Ignatius understood this was not a night to convince. Being faithful to what he knew was enough. In the following days, whispers began to spread. People said Ignatius had changed. Some doubted. Some feared.
Ignatius walked the familiar streets, but everything now seemed changed. The scrutinizing eyes were no longer hidden. People looked at him with doubt. Whispers followed his every step like a cold wind weaving through leaves. He knew he was entering dangerous territory. But what kept Ignatius moving forward was a simple belief. Every step, no matter how slow, must align with what he trusted. One day, he encountered a group of young people arguing. Ignatius stood quietly. He did not speak immediately. He only observed. He only listened. Then, from the depth of silence, he told his story. Not boldly, not forcefully, just slow words, enough for anyone listening to feel their honesty. Some were surprised. Some were skeptical, but at least a few eyes lingered. Those eyes were the first seeds, seeds for trust to grow. Ignatius walked the familiar streets, but everything now seemed changed. The scrutinizing eyes were no longer hidden. People looked at him with doubt. Whispers followed his every step like a cold wind weaving through leaves. He knew he was entering dangerous territory. But what kept Ignatius moving forward was a simple belief. Every step, no matter how slow, must align with what he trusted. One day, he encountered a group of young people arguing. Ignatius stood quietly. He did not speak immediately. He only observed. He only listened. Then, from the depth of silence, he told his story. Not boldly, not forcefully, just slow words, enough for anyone listening to feel their honesty. Some were surprised. Some were skeptical. But at least a few eyes lingered. Those eyes were the first seeds, seeds for trust to grow. Day by day, opposition increased. People who had known him before began to turn away. Familiar faces now wore caution and wariness. Ignatius learned to remain calm. He knew that if he reacted too quickly, he would lose something far more important: faithfulness to himself. Late at night, as the city slept, Ignatius sat by the oil lamp. He watched the light dance on the wall. He thought about the road ahead, about the cost of continuing. There were moments he felt utterly alone. So alone that each gust of wind through the window reminded him of his smallness. But he was not afraid. He understood that fear was only part of the journey. One day, he heard of those who had stood firm under pressure, but ultimately fell. These stories did not scare him. They made him more determined. The light he carried was not to defeat others, but to live faithfully with what he knew. Day after day, Ignatius met more people. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, his words were like seeds dropping onto dry soil, slowly sprouting. He knew that one day his choices would change everything forever, not just for himself, but for those who had listened, for the whole city. And one very late evening, standing on a familiar street, Ignatius realized the path he walked was no longer the path of the silent boy. It was the path of someone who could face the truth even as darkness approached. He took a deep breath, looked up at the sky. The stars twinkled, reminding him that even in darkness there is light to follow.
Darkness was spreading around Ignatius. It was no longer quiet, watchful eyes. Now came clear warnings. Those who had once respected him now turned away. Familiar streets felt cold and strange. But Ignatius kept moving, each step slow, as if he wanted to remember every sound, every scent of this world before it changed completely. One morning, as sunlight leapt across the rooftops, he paused, watching the city awaken, doors opening, people stepping out with worry in their eyes. Ignatius took a deep breath. He knew today would be different. Silence was no longer enough. He had to speak, to live, to move. When he met those who still trusted him, he smiled. Eyes that had once doubted now listened. But not everyone. There would always be those unwilling to change. He told of the days he walked in silence, of patience and small, persistent steps, of a light that did not need to conquer darkness, only to exist. Day by day, stories spread. Some laughed, some nodded, but Ignatius did not mind. He understood that a seed needs time to grow. Some nights he returned to the place he once sat quietly. He looked at the star-filled sky and realized that even the smallest light is enough to guide the way. Then, one day, darkness approached closer. Danger was no longer distant, but Ignatius did not retreat. He walked forward, slow but deliberate. Each step was a declaration, not to flee, not to compromise, but to remain faithful to what his heart knew. When at last the danger reached its peak, Ignatius stood firm. He knew the cost would be high, but he also knew that the light within him would never be lost. Before everything ended, he looked around. People ran, afraid, but he saw eyes that had listened, learned, changed, even a little. And in that moment, Ignatius understood. Life does not always have to be grand, but it can be enough to change small hearts, to touch those who still believe. When he fell, there was no shout, no grandeur, only quiet. But that quiet left a flame burning silently in the hearts of others. In the days that followed, Ignatius's story spread, not by noise, but by presence in thoughts, in choices. He became a pause in a noisy world, a proof that faithfulness and patience can create the greatest light. And if you are listening late into the night, breathe slowly. Let your heart ease. For every faithful step, even in silence, carries the power to change the world. After Ignatius's slow steps, the world remained quiet.
Yet darkness had never fully disappeared. A young soul, walking the same familiar streets, listened to the wind through the window cracks, felt the rhythm of the city's footsteps, and realized that every small light, however faint, was enough to guide a heart forward. He did not yet know that the coming days would test patience and faith, but he felt something, gentle, calm, quietly calling him onward.
After Ignatius's slow steps, the city remained quiet. The familiar streets were quieter now, but darkness had not disappeared. A gentle wind whispered through the window cracks, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. In another corner of the city, a young man stepped out from an old house. He took a deep breath. The smell of morning dew brushed his nose, reminding him of life, small yet undeniably present. His name was Marcellus. He had never met Ignatius, yet sometimes, in dreams, he felt as if he had heard those steps, as if faint light silently pierced through the darkness. Marcellus walked on the cobbled street, listening to his shoes tap against each stone. Ordinary sounds became precious in the surrounding stillness. He realized that each step was a choice.
Every choice carried a responsibility. He passed a quiet marketplace, shops just opening, flickering lights casting shadows on the cold stone floor. Marcellus paused, listened to a creaking door, heard a cat tiptoe through an alley. Everything was small, yet in this silence everything felt alive. He thought of those who came before, eyes faithful to belief even in darkness. He wondered, would he have the courage to walk as they did? He did not know the answer yet, but one thing he knew: the first step must be slow. He had to feel. He had to listen. Day by day, Marcellus observed more closely. Each person, each glance, each smile told a story.
He said nothing. He only watched. And in the silence, he felt himself learning to live faithfully to what he believed. One evening, as the moon hung low over the rooftops, he stood by the window. Silver light fell upon the empty streets. Every star seemed small, yet their light was never faint. Marcellus felt it in his heart. Even the smallest light was enough to guide a soul. He did not yet know that the coming days would bring many trials, but this quiet, each slow moment had prepared him to face the darkness and to learn to walk not by force, but by deep, abiding faith. The days that followed passed slowly. Marcellus did not notice the change at once. Darkness did not rush in. It arrived gently. At first, it was only longer glances than usual. Conversations stopped when he came near. Doors closed earlier in the evenings. Marcellus sensed it, not with reason, but with a thin, deep feeling resting somewhere in his chest. He continued living as before, working, helping the weary, listening more than speaking. Some afternoons he sat for a long time by the old well, watching the water ripple softly, each wave reflecting a sky slowly changing colors. He understood that everything had two sides. Light and darkness always existed together. One night, when the city had fallen asleep, Marcellus heard a knock. Not hurried, not loud, just 3 taps, steady and slow. He opened the door. A man stood there, his face half hidden in shadow.
He did not speak right away. He simply looked at Marcellus for a long moment. "You are walking a difficult path," the man said softly. Marcellus nodded. He was not surprised. He had felt this for a long time. The man left as quickly as he had come. The door closed. The room returned to its familiar stillness. That night, Marcellus did not sleep at once. He sat beside the oil lamp. The small flame trembled with each breath of wind. He thought of Ignatius, of those who chose faithfulness even at great cost, and he understood that true peace was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep walking even when darkness drew near. From that day on, Marcellus began to speak, not loudly, not forcefully, only enough for those listening to feel comforted. Some came in the night, some left in silence, some stayed simply to sit beside him without words. Marcellus did not count the numbers. He kept his life slow, like breathing, like a small light that never hurried. And deep within, he knew his steps had moved beyond the cobbled streets. He was entering a journey from which there was no turning back, and one he no longer wished to turn away from. Darkness did not arrive in a single night. It came little by little, like dew settling on rooftops unnoticed. Marcellus began to see clearer signs. Someone watching from a distance. Footsteps stopping behind him, then fading away. No one spoke directly, yet everyone understood. The city continued to live. Markets opened. Lamps were lit each evening, but the rhythm had changed. Marcellus walked more slowly, not out of fear, but because he wanted to feel each moment. He knew that when the path narrows, every step matters. One evening, as he sat with a few people in the small room, the whispers suddenly stopped. No one said anything, yet every gaze turned toward the door. Marcellus stood. He did not rush. He opened it. Outside was darkness. No one stood there, only wind and a heavy silence. He closed the door. No one asked. No one needed to ask. From that day, the gatherings grew fewer, not because faith had weakened, but because the danger was growing clearer. Marcellus spent more time alone. He walked early in the morning, before the city awoke, listening to birds, listening to his heartbeat blend with the rhythm of the earth. He remembered the moment light had changed Ignatius's life, and he understood that not everyone is called by blinding light. Some are called by quiet endurance. One day, a warning came softly. An old friend stopped by, did not stay long, spoke only one sentence before leaving. "You should prepare." Marcellus nodded. He had been preparing for a long time.
That night, he sat by the window for hours, watching the moon rise high. Silver light spread across rooftops and empty streets. He did not ask to be spared. He asked only for enough peace to never turn away from what he had chosen. And in that deep silence, Marcellus felt a gentle presence, not to rescue him from the darkness, but to remain with him until the final step. That morning arrived very ordinarily. The sky was not darker, nor was it brighter. Marcellus woke early. He washed his hands with cold water. He heard birds calling across the rooftops. Everything felt strangely familiar. He knew the day would be different. not because of any clear sign, but because the peace within him had grown very deep. When they came, Marcellus did not resist. He stood, put on his worn coat, stepped outside, as if leaving for a short journey. The cobbled road led him past familiar places, the old well, the quiet market corner, doors that once closed in silence. Some watched, some turned away, some lowered their heads. Marcellus did not seek their eyes. He simply walked, slowly, steadily. There were no questions left in his heart, only presence, light as breath, enduring as moonlight. When he stopped, there was no defense, no bitterness, only a deep stillness. He thought of Ignatius, of those who had walked before him, of the narrow path that light had chosen. And then the moment passed. Not loudly, not violently, like a quiet breath dissolving into the air. The city continued on. Markets reopened. Lamps were lit again. Yet something had changed, unseen, unnamed, only this. Footsteps afterward walked more slowly. Small lights endured longer. And in the quiet night, light no longer needed to speak. It was already there. After that, everything continued, not loudly, but very slowly. Morning arrived the way it always does. Light did not rush into the room. It paused on the window ledge, then gently spread across the cool floor. Someone woke up without remembering their dream, only knowing the sleep had been deep. Outside, the city stirred, not waking, just turning slightly. The first footsteps touched the cobbled road, slow, steady. No one noticed the rhythm had changed, only that there was no hurry. Wind brushed along old walls, carrying the scent of damp stone, aged wood, years that did not need names. A window opened, then closed. A cloth was folded, a chair drawn closer to the table. Very small actions, almost unnoticeable. Yet these were the things that kept the world moving. Midday passed quietly. Shadows shifted along the wall, unwatched. Someone paused at a crossroads, not lost, just unready to choose. Afternoon arrived more slowly than usual. Voices softened, not from fear, but from ease. Somewhere, someone remembered a low, calm voice. Not the words, only the feeling of rest. Evening settled like thin cloth, over rooftops, over roads. Lamps were lit, not bright, just enough. Someone sat alone for a long while, not thinking, only breathing. Breath steady, deep, blending with the rhythm of night. Nothing needed to happen. Nothing was missed. Time was not counted. It simply passed. And if someone listened closely, they would sense that this silence was not empty. It was full, full of what had passed, full of footsteps no longer heard, full of light that no longer needed proof. Somewhere deep, Ignatius was still walking. Marcellus was still present, not as memory, but as ground, always there. And as sleep draws nearer, the story slows with it. Words thin out, spaces grow longer. There is no clear ending, only the gentle continuation
of a peaceful night.
And then the silence continues, not the silence of an ending, but the silence of having nowhere else to go. The night deepens slightly, not darker, just thicker. The air settles, as if it too is resting. Somewhere, a small lamp is still burning. No one watches it. Yet, it remains. The light does not move. It breathes. There are moments when the listener forgets where they are lying. Space loosens. Time softens. Breath moves in. Breath moves out. No need to follow it. It finds its own rhythm. Outside, wind crosses distant fields, carrying no stories, only coolness. Grass bends gently, then stills. The moon drifts slower than thought. Its light does not seek to reveal, only to remain. If someone is still awake, they may sense something very old settling within. Not a clear memory, only the feeling of having been guided, like a hand resting lightly on the back. Not pushing, not pulling, only reminding that everything is all right. Footsteps stopped long ago, but the path never disappeared. It lies there, quiet, patient, waiting for those who need it. Ignatius does not need to be named, neither does Marcellus. They are no longer stories, they are rhythm, the rhythm of quiet choices, the rhythm of light that does not speak. And as sleep grows deeper, words begin to fall away. There is no need to hold them. If a sentence passes unheard, it does not matter. The story does not need to be remembered, only felt. Like rain far away, like the sea unseen. At the deepest layer of night, there are no questions, only a complete resting. And if there comes a moment when the listener hears nothing at all, that is not loss, that is arrival.